Today I am reading from the 10th book in the Left Behind series. The name of this book is The Remnant on the Brink of Armageddon. And I'm reading today chapter 14. It was time to wake Chloe, at least, and once she was up, the others soon followed. Chang had called. The tribulation force needed to be packed and prepared to relocate at a moment's notice. Chloe worked quickly, though bleary eyed, with Kenny wrapped around her neck most of the time. George and Mac collected large quantities of canned and boxed foods, then started loading cars. Hannah, who helped Leah get the co op stuff in order, looked like she could use several more hours of sleep. George told Buck he had arranged for someone to come and get him in Chicago, but agreed he should reroute them, possibly through Long Grove, and meet them there. We've got room for you and Chloe and the baby in San Diego, and I'd love to be your pilot. Buck had to think about that one. He could think of worse scenarios. Leah had tentatively arranged for him and his family to move in with Lionel Whalum and his wife. Buck didn't know the man, but he wouldn't likely have personally known anyone that he might stay with. Whalum had agreed to the setup, telling Leah he had a large suburban home, but that he was planning to be gone frequently with runs to and from Petra. Leah, Buck said, maybe you and Hannah ought to move in with the Whalums and let us take this opportunity George is offering. That way you'd have a pilot, and so would we. Why don't you just take over and do this job, Buck, if you're going to make all my work a waste of time anyway? Chloe's up now anyway, Leah. Why don't you just get yourself ready to go? She looked stricken and hurried away. Buck intercepted her. Listen, let's forgive each other under the circumstances. Think about this. Whalum is transporting stuff to Petra all the time. I know, Buck. Chloe and I have been helping coordinate that. Are you thinking? Are you insulting? She said. You're not thinking. What? Catch a ride over there with him sometime, Leah. Anybody in Petra you want to see? That stopped her briefly. Oh, Buck, you can't be serious. I don't deny I'm enamored of Tyson, who isn't, but he's not going to have the time for a friend with all he has going over there. So what? Are you afraid Long Grove is going to be too close to Chicago when the bomb hits? It may be. No, you want to go with George to San Diego? They might need medical help out there, and there are private quarters. Nobody's sharing a house. They're in underground shelters like Quonset huts. No, that sounds perfect for you and your family. I'll talk to Hannah about Long Grove. Did I hear my name? Hannah said. I prefer the Southwest. Got a contact? Leah said. Need one? Within a few minutes, Hannah had agreed to stick with Leah. Zeke and Mac were the only two left without arrangements. I got to be somewhere where people can get to me to take advantage of my services, Zeke said. Someplace safe but central. Working on it, Chloe called out. I want to be where I can make runs to Petra, Max said on one of his trips and in for more boxes. Maybe get Rayford out. Rayford ought to stay there, Buck said. Might drive him crazy after a while, but he's got everything he needs to safely keep track of everybody. By the time they were set to pull out, if and when the word came, Albie had invited Mac to Al-Basra, and Zeke was set up with an underground unit in western Wisconsin, a city called Avery, not far from the Minnesota border. Buck called Chang. We're going to be noisy parading out of here, he said, but I don't guess we have any choice. Go in the wee hours, Chang said. Only a few at a time over the next few days. I'll be able to tell if anyone's onto you. It's a risk, but you know the odds if you wait. The entire group, all 40 of them, including the 31 from the place, met in a huge circle. They wrapped their arms around each other and prayed for each other and wept. All of them, even George and Mac. And seeing all those tears made Kenny cry, which made the others laugh. It seemed as if we just got here, Buck said, and now we don't know when we might see each other again. I have a list here of what order we'll go in, and my family and I will be the last ones out. The strong building had been safe for only so long, and now it would disgorge a few of them at a time into a hostile world that belonged to Antichrist and the false prophet, the global community, and millions of searching eyes that demanded a sign of loyalty none of these had. I could lose you, Vasily said, misplace you. What can I say? You escaped. Steve sat with him in the parking lot at Resurrection Airport. What? I raced away in my chair and you couldn't keep up? Too late. Let's go. It wasn't easy, and Steve wasn't going to pretend it was. He had often wondered, when reading or seeing a movie about a condemned man, what it must have felt like to make that last long walk. It wasn't long enough. He felt especially in a chair. As they approached the loyalty mark application site in the north wing of the airport, Steve noticed the line was longer than he had seen it in ages. The crackdown, the intensifying, whatever new Babylon wanted to call it, was working. Hundreds milled around the statue of Carpathia, bowing, praying, singing, worshiping. For the moment, the guillotine was silent. In fact, Steve didn't know if it had ever been used in this part of the state. Some had been martyred, martyred near Denver, others in Boulder. Maybe he would be the first here. Perhaps no one was trained to use the facilitator, but there it stood, gleaming and menacing, and those in line for the mark laughed nervously and kept glancing at it. Steve was still in the part of the line that snaked its way to the decision-making point. No one was expected to make the wrong choice, of course. The stocky, 60-ish red-haired woman with the documents and the files and the keyboard barely looked up as people identified themselves and chose what they wanted tattooed and where they wanted it. As they were administered the mark, they raised their fist or whooped and hollered. Then they made straight for the image where they paid homage. Steve had lived for his daily encouragement and education from Tyson Ben Judah. It had been his only form of church. There was interaction between him and Rayford and him and Chang, and occasionally him and Buck or one of the others. But he was starved for live contact with other believers. That would be quickly remedied. Steve debated whether to use his real name to finally come clean and tell the GC he had been undercover for a long time, but his name would easily be linked with Buck Williams from their days at the Weekly. And how long would it take to progress from there to the link with Rayford, then Chloe, then the co-op, and who knew, maybe even Chang? He couldn't risk that kind of exposure, especially for people who didn't know it was coming. When it was finally Steve's turn, the woman noticed Vasily in his dress uniform and said brightly, "We've been expecting you two. This must be Pinkerton Stevens." "In the flesh, Ginger," Steve said, studying her badge. "How about a nice 6 and a tasteful image of the Supreme Potent?" she said, looking him up and down, clearly puzzled by his garb. "And where would you put it?" Steve said. "Your choice." "Well, this won't work," he said, showing his stump. Ginger's smile froze and she searched his eyes. She had not found that amusing and looked as if she wanted to say so. He had put her in an uncomfortable position and she clearly didn't like it. And I understand it doesn't work on plastic." "That is true," Ginger said, appearing relieved to move on. "Then we can't put it here, can we?" he said, knocking on his forehead. Snap, snap, snap. He popped off his combination nose and forehead appliance, exposing his eyeballs and brain sac. Guess this would be the only option, Ginger, he said in a nasal voice resulting from no covering on his nose. Oh, my, Mr. Stevens, who wants to put it there? Steve said. Who will volunteer for that chore? And when I wanted to display it, would I just pop my face off? She turned away. I'm sure that will work. It's totally hygienic and should cause no problem. I could take my mouthpiece off too, Ginger, if you want the full effect. Please, no. Well, anyway, I'm in the wrong line. Pardon me? I'm not accepting the mark of loyalty. You're not? Well, that's not really an option. Oh, sure it is, Ginger. I mean, the other is a much shorter line. In fact, I'll be the only one in it. But it's most definitely an option, isn't it? You're choosing the loyalty and for I'm choosing the guillotine, Ginger. I'm choosing death over pretending that Nicola Carpathia is divine or ruler over anything. She looked to Vasily. Is he putting me on? Sadly, he's not, ma'am. Ginger studied Steve, then reached for her walkie-talkie. Ferdinand, we need someone to run the facilitator. The what? You know, she whispered, the facilitator. The blade? You serious? Yes, sir. Be right there. A tall, balding man with red cheeks hurried over. You're not taking the mark, he said. Yes, Steve said, but I thought I would try the blade first. Please, can we just get on with this? Do I have to go through the whole ordeal again? This is no joking matter. It's no redundant matter either. So could you just do what you have to do and get me processed? There is no processing. You just sign stipulating that you made this choice of your own free will and you die. Yes. Do I get my last words? Anything you want. Cheeks found the proper form. Steve signed Pinkerton Stevens. And the man said, you realize this is your last chance to change your mind about Carpathia being Antichrist, evil personified, about Leon Fortunato being the false prophet. Yes, I know. No changing my mind. Dyed in the wool, aren't we? Let's just say I've thought it through clearly. Steve glanced at Vasily, who had paled and held a hand over his mouth. Others in the line murmured and pointed, and now all eyes were on the strange-looking wounded man in the undershirt. Ferdinand slipped between a couple of chairs and went to study the guillotine. They say it can be run by one person, he said. He looked up. Over here, Mr. Stevens. Steve rolled to a line 4 feet in front of the contraption. His belly began to tighten and his breath came in short puffs. God be with me, he said silently. Give me the grace, give me the courage. The grace came, the courage he wasn't so sure about. He wished he were at a facility with more experience. Ferdinand had raised the blade to its full height, but as he worked with the elements at the business end of the shaft, he looked tentative and kept peeking up and pulling his fingers back. I think if that safety lever is set, you're okay, Steve said. Oh, sure enough, thank you. Don't mention it. You can owe me. It took Ferdinand a second, but that elicited a wry look. He set the restraining bar in place, none too easily, then found the release cord and surveyed the whole scene once more. Kenny was asleep. Buck sat hunched before the TV to which he had hooked his phone. Chang had devised some digital marvel to transmit the images from Colorado. A TV camera in a corner showed the entire area, and Chloe pointed. That's him, Buck. He's right there. Buck's chest felt heavy, and he was short of breath. Steve was the only one before the guillotine, and a man seemed to be fiddling with it. Do you have a basket of some sort? Steve said. Excuse me, Ferdinand said. A container, unless you wanted to just chase after my... Yes, thank you. One moment. Steve wanted to say, happy to be of service. Ferdinand found a corrugated box that for some reason had been lined with tin foil. Steve didn't even want to think about why. Now, the man said, looking up, if I can get you to come here. Steve rolled close. Can you get down, or I can get myself in there, Steve said, though it seems a little lacking in customer service that I should be expected to. I will get assistance. No, I will get situated once I've had my say. Oh, yes, your say. Now is the time. Feel free. Will this be recorded? The man nodded. Well, then. Steve spun halfway around to face those in line for the mark of loyalty. Their eyes would not meet his, but he sensed a hunger on their faces for what they clearly felt privileged to soon see. I don't expect you to believe me or to agree or to change your minds, he began, but I want to go on record for my own sake anyway. I have chosen the guillotine today so that I can be with God. I am a believer in Jesus Christ, the Son of God, the maker of heaven and earth. I renounce Nikolai Carpathia, the evil one, Satan incarnate. When you take his mark today, you once and for all forfeit your chance for eternal life in heaven. You will be bound for hell, and even if you want to change your mind, you will not be able to. I wish more of my life had been dedicated to the one who gave his for me, and into his hands I commit myself for the glory of God. Steve spun back around, launched himself out of the chair and into the guillotine. Please just do it quickly, Ferdinand, he said. Buck could not take his eyes from the screen. Chloe sat next to him, her face buried in her hands. The picture disappeared, but Buck sat there for almost an hour. Finally, his phone chirped. It was Chang, who also sounded shaken. A confidential note was added to the report from personnel at the Loyalty Center, he said. It tells Suhail Akbar, you will no doubt be hearing from the Global Community Command Center in Colorado, which will need not only a replacement for the deceased Pinkerton Stevens, but also for his second in command, Vasily Medev. The latter was just found in his GC automobile. Medev died of a self-inflicted gunshot to the head. Of course, neither death was reported on the Global Community News Network. By the time Ming Toy landed in Shanghai after flying all night, she was more than exhausted. She had made the seemingly interminable flight many times before, but she could not sleep this time because she was getting to know the pilot. He was an acquaintance, if not a friend, of George Sebastian's, and while she had not met George, they had many mutual friends by now. Her pilot, a South Korean named Ri Woo, had been a naturalized American citizen at the time of the rapture and was stationed at the same base as Sebastian. Everyone knew George, Wu said. He was the biggest man most of us had ever seen, let alone the biggest on the base. There was nothing George couldn't do. Wu had been a pilot trainer specializing in small, fast, maneuverable craft with high fuel capacity and thus long distance capability. I was unusual for a Korean American, Mr. Chow, because I acted more American than Asian. Even though I did not move to America until after I was a teenager, I had no religion. I would have made a good Chinese. You grew up atheist, I bet. I did, Ming said. But Korea, especially South Korea, is about half Christian, half Buddhist, isn't it? Yes, but I wasn't either. I wasn't really an atheist either. I was just nothing. I didn't think about religion. My feeling was there might be a God. I didn't know and didn't care as long as if there was one, he left me alone. I worshiped me. You know what I mean? Of course, didn't we all? All my friends, we all worshiped ourselves. We wanted fun, girls, cars, things, money. You too? I want to hear the rest of your story, Bree, Ming said, but it's time for me to use my real voice and tell you the truth. He leaned toward her and squinted in the darkness at the change in her tone. No, she said, I never wanted girls. I wanted boys. He recoiled, smiling. Really? It's not like that, she said. I am a girl, in fact. I am a grown woman. I have been married. I am a widow. Now you are putting me on. I'm telling you the truth. And she told her own story for the next hour or so. Would you believe I have heard of your brother? Wu said. No, it's true. No one mentions his name, but many in our underground group in San Diego know he is there inside the palace. Wu then finished her own story of how scared he was when the disappearances occurred. I did not know such fear existed. Nothing ever bothered me before. I was a daredevil. That's why I wanted to fly and not big commercial jets or helicopters or props. I wanted to fly fastest, most dangerous. I had many close calls, but they only thrilled me and never made me cautious or careful. I couldn't wait to live on the edge of danger again. But when so many people disappeared, I was so scared I could not sleep. I went to bed with the light on. Don't laugh. I did. I knew something terrible and supernatural had happened. It was as if only an event that huge could have slowed me down and made me think about anything. Why did these people vanish? Where did they go? Would I be next? I asked everybody I knew, and even more people who were just like me and had never even been inside a church started saying that it was something God did. If that was true, I had to know. I began asking more people, reading, looking for books in the chaplain's office. I even found a Bible, but I couldn't understand it. Then someone gave me one that was written in simple language. I didn't even know for sure there was a God, but I prayed just in case. This Bible called itself the Word of God, so I said, God, if you are out there somewhere, help me understand this and find you. Ming, now, that is your real name, right? No more surprises? She nodded. No more. Ming, I read that Bible the way a starving man eats bread. I devoured it. I read it all the time. I read it over and over, and I found books and chapters that were too puzzling. I skipped and found ones that I could follow. When I found the Gospels and the letters from Paul, I read and read until I collapsed from exhaustion. In the back of the Bible, it listed verses that showed how a person could become a Christian, a follower of Christ, and have their sins forgiven. It said you could know you were saved from your sins and would go to heaven when you died, or be taken to be with Christ at the rapture. I was heartbroken. I was too late. I believed with all my heart that this was what the disappearances were all about, and I cried and cried, regretting having missed it. But I followed the verses the salvation guide listed, and I prayed to God and pleaded for him to forgive me. I told him I believed he died for me and would receive me to himself. I felt so clean and free and refreshed. It was as if I had not missed anything at all. I mean, I wish I had been a believer in time to have been raptured, but I have no doubt that I am saved anyway and that I will be in heaven someday. Hours later, it seemed to Ming that she and Ree had been lifetime friends. Exhausted as she was, she would rather hear him talk and watch him respond to her than sleep. As the sun rose on the yellow sea, Ming was sickened by the vast expanse of blood that extended all the way into the harbors. The lower they flew, the more she could see the devastation, the rotting wildlife. When they landed, they were in suit face masks that did little to filter the stench. Ree was delivering goods for the co-op in Shanghai, but he agreed to take her on to Nanjing, 200 more miles west. Chang had told his parents of an underground church there, and though it was a big city, Ming prayed God would lead her to them. Ree stayed with her as she carefully sought out secret believers. It was not easy. They would sit in small eateries, and she would carefully tip back her cap occasionally so a fellow believer might see her mark. It was not until Reed did this at a small grocery that an old woman approached and did the same to them. The three of them met in an alley and quickly shared stories. Ming understood the woman's dialect and translated for Reed. The old woman said that the underground church was almost non existent now in Nanjing and had largely relocated to Xinghao, yet another 300 plus miles northwest. Ming finally slept on the last leg of the journey, but even unconscious, she worried Ree might doze at the controls. In the days of tighter aviation rules, he would never have been allowed to fly on so little rest. The GC seemed on the rampage in Zingzhou, hauling the unmarked to loyalty mark centers, rounding up Jews to take to concentration camps, and shouting through bullhorns every time a new session of worshiping the image of Carpathia came due. Even the thousands who already boasted his mark appeared weary of the constant requirements and the treatment of the undecided. Ming and Ree found a cheap hotel that asked no questions and rented them tiny individual rooms, not much bigger than cots, where they paid too much to sleep too little. But the rest took the edge off, and when they met up again, they set off to find the underground believers. Ming finally connected with a small band of Christ followers who hid in the basement of an abandoned school. Ree had to get back to the airport and eventually to San Diego, and parting with him, though they had just met, felt to Ming like an amputation. He promised to come back and to be sure that the little church in Zingzhou was added to the co-op list, though they had little with which to barter. Ming had been able to connect with Chang in New Babylon and learned of the gradual dispersion of the tribulation force from Chicago and the soon relocation of the Williams family to San Diego. "You must get to know them, Ree," she said, "and become more than acquaintances with Sebastian. My dream is to find my parents and take them back there with me one day." It was more than a week before Ming found anyone who had heard of any Wongs. Despite the popularity of the name in that area, it was a weary old man with liquid eyes who sadly told her, "We know Wongs, late middle-aged couple. He very loyal to Potent, but never took mark." "That's him," Ming said. "I so sorry, young one. He was found out." "No. He died with honor." "Please, no. He was believer. Your mother grieving, but okay. She was small group about 50 miles west in the mountains." "And she is a believer too?" Ming asked through tears. "Oh, yes. Yes, I take you to her when time is right." And that is the end of chapter 14. Next, I'll be reading chapter 15. Thank you for joining me and have a wonderful day.